To scale effectively, organizations must choose how to distribute power. In a strictly centralized model, decision-making is consolidated at the top to coordinate activities directly. But as complexity grows, this structure often bottlenecks. Decentralization pushes that authority downward. The core premise here is proximity. A local manager embedded in a specific market possesses more timely, granular information than an executive hundreds of miles away from the actual problem. To monitor performance without micromanaging, the organization divides itself into independent units called responsibility centers, or strategic business units. These units are typically categorized by their financial function as cost, revenue, profit, or investment centers. What truly defines each of these business units is the explicit authority granted to its manager. They are given the power to make decisions that directly affect the major financial determinants of their specific center. An organization cannot expand its footprint without relying on these autonomous units. However, delegating this level of authority requires an exacting system to measure exactly how well each unit is performing. This measurement relies on a foundational rule, the controllability principle. A manager's performance and their incentive package must be judged based on factors under their direct jurisdiction. Controllable factors are the specific costs and revenue streams a manager can actually influence within a given period. If they can't change it, they shouldn't be graded on it. Yet, large enterprises systematically break this rule. They routinely force non-controllable factors, like the expenses generated by central headquarters, onto the ledgers of local managers. They do this to enforce goal congruence. Headquarters needs local units to prioritize the overarching objectives of the entire company, rather than chasing isolated, local victories. To ensure this alignment, corporate leadership allocates arbitrary, shared headquarters costs downward. They use specific mathematical models to distribute this overhead, and these models directly alter the bottom line upon which manager performance is judged. This creates a deliberate paradox in corporate accounting, holding managers strictly accountable for expenses they lack the authority to change, all to bind their independent units back to the whole. These expenses are called common costs. They are indirect costs, like central IT infrastructure, human resources, or corporate advertising, shared across two or more units or products. The analytical problem with common costs is that they are indirect. Identifying a precise one-to-one cause and effect relationship to figure out exactly which unit consumed which portion of the resource is usually impossible. Because the math is imprecise, the decision to allocate these costs is driven by behavior. First, it reminds local managers that central support services exist and that they would incur significant expenses to replicate them independently. Second, it establishes a hard financial reality. Profit center managers must recognize that their local earnings are only truly profitable if they contribute to covering a portion of the organization's overarching overhead. Third, allocating these costs creates a mechanism for internal financial policing. Managers forced to bear expenses they do not control are highly motivated to pressure headquarters to restrain those central costs. But allocating these indirect costs poorly carries a specific systemic danger: sub-optimization. When an allocation method is perceived as unfair, segment managers may begin to optimize only for their own unit's best interests, rejecting cooperation. This local protectionism degrades the performance of the organization as a whole. To distribute these costs, companies rely on specific accounting formulas. The first is the standalone method. This table shows the proportionate costs of servicing three distinct managers. The total traceable cost of servicing them independently is $10,000, distributed among Luciano at $7,000, Ratzinger at $2,000, and Wojtyla at $1,000. The organization has $8,000 in common costs to allocate among them. The standalone method distributes this pool proportionately, based entirely on the fraction of the total traceable cost each unit would incur if operating independently. Looking at the calculation for Luciano, he accounts for 70% of the initial $10,000 cost of servicing. Therefore, he is allocated exactly 70% of the $8,000 common cost pool, which equals $5,600. The math follows for the remaining managers. Ratzinger's 20% share translates to $1,600, and Wojtyla's 10% share equals $800. The entire $8,000 pool is efficiently distributed. While this model lacks a direct cause and effect link to exactly how much resource each manager actually used, it perfectly preserves relative proportionality between the units. Because the math feels equitable, managers generally accept it. The alternative approach is the incremental method. Instead of dividing the common cost pool into proportionate slices, this model treats the pool as a cascading waterfall. The first mechanical rule of the incremental method requires sorting the cost objects in strict descending order based on their total traceable cost. Luciano sits at the top with $7,000, followed by Ratzinger, then Wojtyla, with the $8,000 common cost pool hovering above. The rule dictates that the common cost is allocated up to the exact maximum amount of each unit's traceable cost, moving down the line until the entire common pool is completely depleted. Luciano is first in the sequence. Because his traceable cost is $7,000, he absorbs the first $7,000 of the $8,000 common cost pool, leaving exactly $1,000 remaining. Ratzinger is next. His traceable cost is $2,000, which provides more than enough capacity to absorb the final $1,000 from the pool. The common cost is now fully depleted. Because the pool ran out before reaching him, Wojtyla receives exactly $0 in allocated common costs. Here, the math produces a radical disparity. The exact same manager, Wojtyla, is either charged $800 or pays absolutely nothing. This difference isn't based on his actual performance or resource consumption, but entirely on a theoretical accounting choice made by headquarters. Comparing the outcomes of the standalone and incremental models side by side reveals the stark reality of corporate accounting. There is no single, objective truth in common cost allocation. Returning to the controllability principle we established earlier, neither mathematical model successfully isolates factors the managers can actually control. Both formulas impose external burdens. This creates immediate psychological friction. For example, allocating costs based on an ability-to-bear basis, where units with higher operating income shoulder more overhead, actively penalizes highly successful managers with heavier cost burdens while inadvertently subsidizing underachievers. When performance metrics are tied to arbitrary or unfair allocations, managers' morale inevitably drops. It breeds deep resentment toward corporate leadership and sparks dysfunctional conflict between the business units themselves. Yet, despite these severe behavioral consequences, headquarters will continue to enforce allocation. It remains the only reliable mechanism to guarantee that profit center earnings cover the overarching corporate structure. A direct cause and effect tracking system will always be the gold standard for fairness, but in large, complex organizations with shared resources, mapping those precise connections is usually mathematically impossible. The allocation of common costs serves as a profound tool of behavioral engineering. Corporate leaders accept that perfect fairness must often be sacrificed to force the essential goal congruence required to keep a decentralized organization intact.